So what did you build?
All right, I built a thing. Does some stuff. So the thing I built is kind of a terrain dresser for Unity's terrain system.
Yay.
Let me actually open the appropriate thing. So what this thing does is it populates trees, textures, and details based upon an alpha map or based upon a texture.
Okay.
So in this case, I've got a really simple color key. It's grayscale. It's this little guy right here.
Okay.
And then I set it up so it only pushes trees out on the green part, which is this part right here. It is flipped. It does flip. Kind of weird, but if you're just aware that it's going to flip, then you can arrange your textures accordingly. The way this thing works is you dump a couple of different scripts onto a terrain. But it primarily functions out of the Procedural Landcover Dresser script, PLD.
Okay.
I've also got two other scripts, which are a CSV, comma separated value reader. So this will read basically an Excel sheet and pull colors out of it, like the Landfire database. These guys have a CSV model for their 40 Scott Bergen fire behavior fuel thingies. And when you get the CSV and open it up, it looks like this.
Okay. Oh,
And so each one of these is a color.
Right.
And it corresponds to a type of terrain, or like a key set is what I'm calling them.
Okay. Gotcha.
So this will be a gray color. This is black, where there's no data. And then I don't think there's actually a true white in here at all, which would be all ones.
Gotcha. Good.
Okay, so I've used that. Just load up the other scene. And that creates an image that's used in conjunction. That key is used in conjunction with an image, and it looks like this.
Gotcha.
So this is kind of flipped and oriented incorrectly, based upon map, like looking at a map. North is actually going this direction, and then east is up right now. North is to the right, and east is up.
Fernan there in the third quadrant?
This is Fernan right here. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if you just rotated it counterclockwise,
Right.
90
I have it as a regular texture, and this is how it's supposed to look. But again, because of that weird flipping that happens, I had to flip it this way to actually get it to work as a key. So you might have to play with flipping the whatever image you're using as an image key a couple different ways to try to get it to match up with your height map. So how this thing's working is you have that key I showed you. There's the big one, which is this FM 40 guy. I'll go over that in a moment. In this smaller one, I only have 3 colors. So I have 3 keys. So inside this land cover image key, I've got the 3 colors here.
Gotcha.
I actually have them set up. I should be able to do. Let me see if I can do this. Right.
So do we need to incorporate the landfire data? Then do we need to make enough keys for each individual color?
Correct.
Ouch.
That's why I built that one script, which will actually read
You did.
this.
Perfect.
It will read this file and plug it in automatically into that key area.
Super awesome.
So that way you don't have to go in and type in each one of those sets of numbers into Unity, because I had to do that once and I hated it, and I made a script. So
Okay.
thing.
Can you show us how you link up the
Right.
data code to a texture? So how do you do that?
All right.
How do you get it
So-
to say all this is blue?
This is that image key.
Okay.
Oh man.
The one that I brought in from. Oops. The one that I brought in from that Excel sheet. So here's that Excel sheet. There's all that information there. I'm pretty sure I still have my script set up on this. If not, I'll walk through setting it up. Let's walk through this with a fresh terrain. Okay. Okay. Excellent. All right, that terrain's gone. Now I'm lost.
Well,
3D object, create terrain. All right. So I've got a brand new terrain there. Not playing with the height map. I'm just gonna work with it as is.
yeah, that's cool.
Yay! Just because I can. So now we're going to add the procedural land cover addresser to that terrain.
Okay.
I'm also going to bring in the CSV reader and the terrain asset initializer.
Is there an order of operations for that, or does it matter?
Doesn't really matter which order you put them in, and it depends on what you're going to be doing with them. If you're using like a custom image key and you've got custom pixels and you don't have that CSV file, then you don't need the CSV reader. If you're going to be adding trees, textures, and details to the terrain data by hand, so using this interface here, then you don't need the asset initializer. The asset initializer is what allows you to add assets by script into the terrain data.
Okay.
So I brought in this new terrain.
Mhm.
I've added my scripts. Now on the terrain PLD script, which I'm just going to call the base script the PLD script, I'm going to add the terrain data that corresponds to my new terrain up here.
Okay.
That links the script to his data. I have it set up that way so if you wanted an external object to hold your scripts, you could do that. But it's a lot easier just to dump everything onto the terrain you're working with. Your terrain also needs to be, let me get rid of this. Your terrain also needs to be on its own layer.
Okay.
So I've created a terrain layer. I assume you guys are familiar with creating layers.
Mhm.
So he's in his own layer, and I'm going to make sure that my layer filter right here is also set to that same layer. That's for the raycasting that happens to determine where the trees are placed. Otherwise, the trees don't place correctly on the terrain.
Gotcha.
Next, I'm going to bring in the key that I'm going to use.
So how did you make the key itself?
This key was downloaded. This
Okay.
key was made in Photoshop.
So that's
So
something.
if I used a simple 3-color key, I can just...
The big key is the landfire data, right?
Yeah, the big key is the landfire data. Let's use
So
the
that's
big,
just
let's
download.
use the big key. Let's use the more complicated one. So I dropped my key into the Landcover image slot right here. Now, to get the image key, the Landcover image key actual colors in here, we're going to use our CSV reader.
Gotcha.
So you need to tell the CSV reader script where the PLD script is. Again, just in case you put them on different objects, like you want to automatically spawn in objects or something like that. It's set up that way. So I can just drag my terrain, which automatically has this on it, into that PLD place. Now I've got to tell it where my CSV file is. It doesn't matter where the folder is, but you have to have if you're going to use the CSV reader, you have to have a folder named resources somewhere in your assets folders.
Sure.
Right.
Has to be resources with a capital R. Because it's going to look for that resources folder and find the file inside of it. So in this case, I've got resources. This is my CSV file. This is that one that I downloaded.
Yep.
It's just the same thing that I opened in Excel. So I've got that guy. I'm going to plug that name into here. Now, the other thing I need to do...
It just needs the file name, not a directory structure.
Correct. It's just the file name. I don't even need a suffix on it.
Data rows would find just by looking at the thing, right?
Right. So now I need to tell it how the information is formatted. I'm actually hunting down where my file is real quick, so I can take a quick look. So I want to skip the first two columns. So in here where it says skip columns, I'm going to say skip 2 columns. I want to skip the top row because it has just the titles of things in it. So I'm going to skip 1 row. There are 2 columns of data, and there are 47. So there's 46. I'm skipping the top row.
Do you want? Oh yeah, you want the black one.
So there's 46 rows of data.
Wait, isn't there 3 data columns?
Yeah, there should be 3 columns, right?
You're right. You're right. 3 data columns. Okay.
Image key.
And then I'm going to check image key reconciliation, because what this is going to do is, if your image key is set up in the PLD script, it's going to go through all of these colors that it's reading out of this file, and it's going to check to see if it corresponds to the pixels in this image key. If it doesn't correspond, or if it's off just by a tiny bit, it's going to find the nearest pixel color and adjust the information it's pulling out of the file to match how Unity is interpreting the colors in the image. If you are splitting hairs, you can turn that off and use the actual colors that Unity is seeing on the image key, but that can be hit or miss.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've done that. Click add image. Oops, out of range. I might have screwed. This might need to actually include
47 and 5.
all of them. Yep. Okay.
Gotcha.
Do not.
No,
so-
that's
yeah.
required.
That actually makes it even easier because then you don't have to.
Yeah. You don't have to do math. Just tell it how many this way and how many this way. No math. And then tell it what to skip. All right. So that worked. Now we want to add a couple textures to our terrain. So we're going to use the terrain asset initializer. This one does have to be placed directly on the terrain.
Okay.
So I'm going to add a blue swatch, a red swatch, this grass. Let's add this. Right there. Getting all anal about how I'm adding things already.
So element 0 should be the base map.
Yeah, yeah. The way Unity terrain works is if something is not assigned to, it will use whatever element 0 is. So if I come in here and add a texture right now, so edit textures, add texture, and then I bring in that base map, it'll apply that base map across the whole thing.
So something I noticed.
It will not do that to subsequent textures as you add them.
Right.
Go ahead.
So with that first one, right now you have the tiling set to 15 pixels. And if you're using the Landfire data, you can put it to the correct pixel so it matches. Can you adjust that inside of your script below? So inside of the PLD terrain set, how do you adjust the scaling on the terrain?
So this just adds by script elements to the terrain data. If you want to adjust those settings, like I just did with this terrain, you got to do it by hand.
Can you do that?
I could set it up so that way it automatically adjusts the elements as you're working with them. That will require this script to be something like 10 times the size in terms of all the little properties that it would expose.
So this isn't actually putting those into the texture.
This will put them into the terrain data up here.
Okay, and then you can adjust.
But it will not. It will just put them all in the default settings. So it'll put them all in with that size setting of
1515. Yeah.
1515. I just came in and added this and modified.
As long as you can edit them after the fact, that should be fine.
Yeah. You can come in after the fact and then tweak them. You only use this to add things in mass or add things in batch to the terrain data. And the reason why you would use this script is because once you've got this script set up to add all of those assets in, you can save the terrain out with that script on it. And then anytime you come in and want to use this key, you already have your assets set up to add in. And if you got to go in and modify some of those assets in terms of texture size for the repeat or whatever that is, you still have to go in by hand, but at least a chunk of the work is done for you.
So how do you add the the normal maps?
Again, normal maps is something that you would have to come in and, for the time being,
okay.
I can't. Normal maps is something I can do here. The tricky thing about normal maps is you might not always have a normal map for texture, and so you couldn't have You would have to have add textures and add normal maps in sync.
Sure.
So if you have
You have to have both at the
4
same
elements and add textures, you would have to have 4 elements and add normal maps, regardless as to whether you actually have 4 normal maps. That makes
Okay.
sense?
So my next question is, how do you link it to the colors?
These colors right here?
Yeah.
Yes, that is the trick. Let me finish adding some assets real quick, and we'll move right into that part. All right. So those are added. Now some trees. I've got the speed tree setups right here. It as long as it would work in a terrain data as a tree, it doesn't matter what tree you're using. Okay, trees are in. A couple of grasses. So I think I have those under here. I'll just add the one grass for now. And I'm not even going to add that. I'm going to remove this actually. There we go. And we can, if you click add objects overwrite, it will replace whatever list is currently present with your new assets. If you
Gotcha.
leave it unchecked, it will add to the current terrain data assets lists. So to get those synced up, we've got these assets lists right here. Texture assets, tree assets, and detail assets.
Okay.
Now, each one of these lists corresponds to a key. So each element in these lists corresponds to one of these colors in our land cover image key.
Gotcha. Okay. So then you can just match them up to element 15 to element 15.
Right.
Okay.
So in the case of the texture assets, you're telling it which texture belongs to that color. So in the case of element 0, which is the urban area, it's all this gray stuff over here, we would want that, for the sake of visibility, let's make that red. So our red texture, and this is where if this if the asset initializer works, it's a little bit more helpful.
Does it automatically?
Because it tells you what the element number is.
Gotcha.
Because it didn't work, I have to kind of count. So my red texture is actually element 0, 1, 2, element 2. So I would put a 2 there. And then my blue texture is element 1. So I want that in element 3. And then I can mix and match kind of between elements 3, 4, 5. Because I'm not going to sit here and try to figure out what they correspond to in here.
Sure.
I'm going to use 5 for the rest of these initial ones. And oops. ideally you'd be going off of their list, which they actually have another list on their website,
Like,
which is their data dictionary.
okay.
And then when you open that up, it looks like this. So they're giving you they give you what their little enumerated value description, which corresponds to this code right here.
Gotcha. Oh, that's great.
And their value corresponds to, those correspond to a color. And so you can use that to determine what each one of those are. So the very first value is urban. The second value is snow ice. So you'd use like whatever your snow ice thing is there. And on and on and on. And so they have all kinds of different information about what types of fuel would be in that area, but it doesn't necessarily give you a good picture of the vegetation. It's just telling you how much fuel is in an area and kind of what types of fuel to look for. So it was kind of tricky when I was first trying to set this up to figure out, okay, what kind of vegetation do I actually put in one of these slots? And after talking with Roger, it was like, just put kind of whatever. That's more describing kind of the density inside of each one of those keys, which we do have some settings for that density. So I've got my textures set up, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, one texture per key.
Okay.
The tree assets is a little bit different. The tree assets, you can have more than one tree per key. So in this case, I could have these keys all have a 1. This one has the first tree type and the second tree type. So it's separated by a comma. This one has this and this. This has this and this.
How much trial and error is there with this? Like, if you need to readjust the density of the trees, or add more or less, do you have to repopulate everything, or can you just readjust it?
Once you get these set up, they can just sit there and you can play with your density. You can play with your jitter, with how randomized their spawn in is.
Okay.
And all of that, independent of having to set this up. This is kind of a one-time setup.
Gotcha.
So you don't.
This is just for a quick placement, and then you go from there.
Right.
Gotcha.
I'm just going to put grass in the red area. All right. The final lists that we could go over, but it's optional, is the weights list. Inside the weights list, this also corresponds to these correspond to the actual assets in the terrain data. So in this case, there's 2 different trees. So there would be up to 2 different tree weights. And this is telling the script the ratio between the trees to create. So if there's say half as many broadleafs as there are conifers, you could have 2 conifers to 1 broadleaf, or 1 and 0.5, or however you want to write out those ratios, just so long as the percentage ratio comes out to be what you want it to be.
Well, wait, so does it have to be a ratio, or does it have to equal a whole number?
Okay, this can be any number, so you could.
Okay, so this is a ratio to
Right.
tree.
Yeah. So if you like I said, if you want 2 conifers to 1 broadleaf, it would be 2 to 1, but it's going to balance that based on the difference between these 2 numbers. So it could be 20 to 10, and then if you have other trees in here, you might have another tree that's 5, and it's set up this way so that way you can use any number set, whether you're using percentage points. So of all the trees on this map, 50% are conifers, 20% are broadleafs, and the other 30% are whatever a third tree is. You could write it out that way, or you could write it out with big numbers. It's really flexible. If you don't have anything in here, it will automatically assume that all trees are equal, and will, anytime there's more than 1 tree in an asset key, it will divide equally among those trees. So in the case where we have this key right here with 2 different trees in it, it's going to choose equally between those trees. That's what this weight represents. Same thing with the detail weights. Anytime you have more than 1 detail in a key, it will use those weights to determine which of those, or how often one of those elements pops up in relationship to the other ones in that key. Does that make sense? We're all set up. Let's first populate the textures. Now, if I were to just hit the button, it's going to throw an error and tell me that I must be in the play mode to initialize the script. So I do have to hit play.
That's sacrilege. That doesn't make any sense.
So I wanted it to be able to work outside of the play mode, but there's some things I needed to initialize and set up that needed play mode to engage. So I can hit populate textures. My computer's going to freeze up for a little bit while it sorts through all the lists and all the different things, and then ta-da, it populated the textures. It actually looks really cool. So
Jacob, how does it handle blending?
So texture blending between 2 textures is based in part on the resolution of the height map as you've set it up in the terrain. So right here we have the height map resolution, which is 513. So it's basically a 512 height map. So between that height map resolution and the resolution of your key image, which mine is also 512, that kind of determines the size of these pixels, these blocks that you can kind of see. There's also inside my script, there's also a blending feature, so you could turn on texture blur. And when you turn on texture blur and then run the texture pass, it will blur these pixels out depending upon how much of a blur size you increase. Now this really does slow down the process. So,
but once it's done the
right.
actual production of splatting all those textures, it shouldn't affect performance at runtime, right?
Right. Once it's done, it is then a part of the terrain data. So you don't actually. This is something you would run before you're actually running a simulation on it.
Right. So then do you, would the final step be turning those scripts off?
Yeah, you could take all the scripts off, and the terrain is set up however you left it.
Okay. All right. Would that be a best practice to do that, or is it fine to just leave them on there?
You could leave them on there. There's nothing inside these scripts that runs automatically.
Okay, so it's all
you have to engage it. So you could just leave the setups there, and it's not going to hurt nothing.
That is super cool.
Except for the very first initialization, which does take up a little bit of room whenever the terrain is first activated in a scene. So you would probably want to take the land cover dresser. I just remembered that there is one script that runs that takes all of your asset settings and compiles it in a way that it can more efficiently read later on. So you probably would want to take all of these off. My recommendation would be to make a copy of your terrain and then not a copy, but make a prefab of your terrain and then instantiate the prefab out and take all the scripts off of the instantiated terrain.
Okay.
So that way, if you wanted to come back and tweak with your terrain, you could. You could come back and mess with some of the settings or whatever you need to there. So we did our texture pass. Now we can do I'm going to do a tree pass. I have no clue where the trees are even going to spawn because I was pretty liberal on where I put trees. So when you're doing the tree thing, I do need to have a warning in there. Tree spacing is really important. If the tree spacing number is too low, you will crash your system. The whole system will die.
So is that difference between the tree density then?
Tree spacing basically is tree density. Tree spacing is how much distance is there between each tree you spawn. Okay. So if I do 100, there will be 100 meters
between each tree. Got it.
Between each tree. Tree jitter is how much the tree can move in that distance between the next tree. Mm-hmm. So at 0.5, it can move randomly anywhere up to 50% of the distance to the next tree in the X and Z coordinates. So when it spawns a tree, that tree could, if say this entire terrain was the tree distance, a tree spawns here, and then the next tree is here. It can spawn anywhere inside of this distance. So if this were 100 meters, it basically creates a grid of trees and then juggles the trees around inside of their respective play zones, their respective areas. This defines how much play they get. So if you make this a 1, that means that this tree could theoretically decide to spawn all the way over here where this other tree would spawn, and so you could get 2 trees spawning inside each other. because the tree spacing is so large, the odds of that happening are really, really small.
So this is not using the tree placement brushes. It's just raycasting and putting the tree.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
it's still using the tree instantiation method inside of the terrain. So when you populate the trees, it's not going to show any trees inside the the terrain. I didn't create a single tree. Why didn't I create a single tree? Is it possible that everywhere I put the trees, there are no trees? I've done that before.
You put the tree spacing at 100, which is pretty big.
Does this one also need to be in play mode for the trees to work?
I am in play mode.
Okay.
Yeah, for any
So
one
then-
of those, for most of these buttons, the populate buttons to work, you got to be in play mode to initialize script. Yeah, you're right. 100 is probably too big. Let's go with 10. I'm used to working on the other terrain, which is massive, like 1,200 meters by 1,200 meters, and so 100 distance is nothing between trees. 94 trees! Awesome. Okay, yeah. That was a scale issue.
Yeah, it's a small terrain.
Yeah. And it's only spawning them in the pixels that would allow that tree to spawn in within that distance. So it creates a grid overlay, basically, over the entire terrain, and then tries to spawn at each one of those points. And if that point is not a spawnable pixel, it will move on to the next point.
Okay, so that's the pixel data and the resolution of the terrain are not identical, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Because like some of these green spots in the imagery should have thousands of trees. So if we
Right.
did scale, that would be
Right. And that was another thing I was saying is that this is obviously not to scale.
right.
But
Okay,
that's
perfect.
but I was going over this, and then we can put some grass. The grass should spawn in the red stuff.
Jacob, the all this splatting stuff and the trees and everything respects height too. So you can do a height map first and then place all this stuff and it'll apply appropriately.
Correct.
Or does it need to be?
It is
okay.
using a raycast to. Oh, thank God! I thought I crashed my system for a second. Yeah, that it spawned grass on every single pixel it could inside the red. Momentary heart attack, but yeah. So it's see it covered all the red area with grass. Oh, one more thing I did that I'm going to implement elsewhere. I gotta clear the trees, otherwise I can't do it. There are clear buttons as well.
That's
that
actually really good. I'm
will
glad you put those in
empty out all of whatever asset you want to empty out. I had to because the trees were, again, making my system really sad. So the thing I wanted to show you was the noise generator I built. So right here you can see tree density noise and then tree density alpha map. This tree spacing is the absolute densest the trees will be, but it can fall off based on an alpha map. So if you have an alpha map that, like if you can imagine a noise map, I have an automatic generator in here as well. So that way, if you have tree density noise checked, it will automatically generate an alpha map like this.
Okay, so it's not so uniform?
Exactly. So that way it's not a blanket density. You could also come in Photoshop and, just paint over, create your own alpha map, painting over this, saying,
Oh,
this
okay.
is where it needs to be really dense, and it falls off in density out over here, and it's that fall off is based on your maximum density, which is that spacing.
Now, do you actually want an alpha channel, or is it just a black and white mask?
It's a black and white mask. It's not an
Okay.
alpha channel.
Don't need the channel.
Yeah,
Perfect.
it's just a diffuse map.
Sure.
Regular diffuse image. And I was going to also employ that in the detail generation as well. So that way your grass can have its density augmented by an alpha map.
Gotcha.
So, God. Okay. Yeah, that's all I wanted to show you.
Cool.